My classmate Kim Dixon did a book review on the book, Star Teachers of Children in Poverty. And the thing that stood out the most was they said that star teachers who define outstanding successfully, their students score higher on standardized tests. Parents and children think they are great. Principals rate them highly. Other teachers regard them as outstanding. And she said even down in one of the title of the chapters, which I thought was amazing, was called Only Decent People Can Be Prepared to Teach. And that stood out to me so much, because at the end of the day, like, this is the humanistic side of us, that to be a star teacher of someone in poverty, you have to know that as you enter into this type of teaching environment, it is going to be totally different, and it's going to be different than how you were raised or your cultural background, or and I think what stands out to me the most also is this lady named Rita Pearson. She kind of spoke at TED Talks a while back. She passed away, but she said, like, every child deserves a champion teacher. And you have to be a champion teacher. Like, if you're teaching in poverty and impoverished neighborhoods, you have to be a champion teacher every day. And that idea of, like, only decent people can teach children and be prepared, and they're highly regarded and the principals love them. You have to keep kind of all that in the forefront of your mind if you decide to go and teach in an urban district, because every day is going to be a battle. There are going to be new challenges every single day, but those children deserve champion teachers. One of my classmates did a book called Culturally Responsive Teaching and the Brain. I've heard of this book before, haven't really dived into it before, but after reading the PowerPoint, I definitely want to read this book. I think the thing that stood out to me the most after reading the PowerPoint, learned a lot about the book, which makes me just want to read it even more. But on slide 9, it says, when thinking about the culture of your students, culture is more than just clothes, food, and language. We as educators have to dive into the deep characteristics of our students' culture, like their worldviews, concepts of self, decision-making, and their notions of fairness. We have to create an environment that our students feel safe enough for their brains to turn off their deflectors and focus on the material that's being taught. This rings so true. As an educator, I taught for many, many years here in Memphis, in the heart of North Memphis. And oftentimes I've seen some teachers fall into the pitfall of thinking, like, Black children only care about, shoes and clothes and rap songs and things of that nature, without really just getting to know, like, culturally who they are. And you clump them into this one, just like this one shell, or this, all purpose or all the above, when that's not necessarily true. So I do like that idea of, like, concepts of self and decision making. That is a part of who our culture is, how we react, and how you handle situations in certain families that may be different, although of the same race, but it may be totally different. And that whole idea of, like, the brain has to turn off the deflectors, that's really big, just to focus on the material that's in front of them. Because oftentimes that is ringing true. There are so many things going on in their mind that is a deflection from what's happening in the classroom. So, I mean, this book right here, after reading the PowerPoint and going through the PowerPoint, I definitely want to consider reading more about this to find out how we can culturally respond to our children, but as well as strengthening, because it says the brain. So it's like, how are children learning? Because it even talks about in here about how you respond, and how you can scaffold what they're learning, and to make those connections in their brain based off their culture. So yeah, kudos to you on this. This was a good read, and I'm definitely going to read more about this book. One of my classmates, Liz Vale, she did the book, The Trouble with Black Boys. I'm kind of familiar with this book. We've read a little bit of it in my school because we do a lot of work around some of the books from Baruti Kafeli, and some of these books have a lot of joining ideas. I think the thing that stood out to me the most from her book was the idea of, it even says, listening to students can help schools improve. And I think the thing that stood out to me the most was the idea of how not only are Black boys being targeted, but a lot of immigrant children are the most vulnerable as well. And we see this a lot in schools where we just automatically assume that being bilingual and speaking two languages at the same time automatically defines who you are and your level of intellect. And we also have a tendency to just automatically start pouring and dumping into them, as opposed to just like stopping and getting to know them and getting to know what they know, so that can guide your instruction on how you will teach them. We assume that Black boys and we assume that immigrant children just automatically need to be saved and they need our help. But I think that this stands out to me the most about how immigrant children are the most at risk and most vulnerable, and how we need to stop marginalizing Black boys, especially if we know that the prison to pipeline is a real thing, with looking at scores and deciding what type of prisons or how many prisons you're going to build in the future. I do think that if you go into the education field, you have to know in the back of your mind that that cannot be the mindset and the mind frame when teaching this specific race. The title of this book is called The Skin That We Speak: Thoughts on Language, Culture in the Classroom. And the authors of this book are Dodie, who is widely acclaimed, has a PhD, and Del Pitt. And this is a review by our classmate Patricia Johnson. And after watching her PowerPoint, I think that the quote that stands out to me the most was on slide 6, where it says, they seek to break down prejudice and biases in classroom settings by granting students access to the power of expressing their cultural language. The researchers and writers of this essay agree that language, no matter what culture or ethnicity, is a product and a shaper of the community. The major theme is to not eliminate the different dialects of students, but to give them the standard English to use as a tool to use in different settings. And this goes back to basically, white folks that teach in the hood about the idea of trying to change culturally who children are. It is very important. I think that main word that stood out to me was the shaper of the community. I think it's very important to use what children have access to, whatever their dialect is, whatever their vernacular is, whatever their slang is, and allow them to see how that fits into the mold of standard English, but we as educators can't see that as a crutch or to judge them on their level of intellect. Our classmate Darnese Allen did a book review on the book called Other People's Children: Cultural Conflict in the Classroom. And I thoroughly enjoyed going through her PowerPoint, learned a lot about this book. This is the same author as another book that I reviewed in this slideshow, Lisa Del Pitt. She's also the author on The Skin That Speaks as well. But one thing that stood out to me was on her slideshow for page 7. She has all these different quotes. And the one quote that stood out to me was, many teachers of color felt excluded from educational dialogue about literacy and instruction. And then this was the one that stood out the most. People learn to write not by being taught skills and grammar, but by writing meaningful context. And too often times we see this idea of like skills, and we kind of zap the joy and just the meaningfulness and just the fluidity and innate qualities of like how learning used to be, how it used to be just so fluid, and it was just like something that just kind of occurred. And now we're falling to this pitfall of like, did you teach this skill? Did they master that skill? Teach this skill, master that skill. So I do think that culturally, especially with teaching with children in urban districts, when you become a classroom teacher, it's going to be easy for you to fall into this pitfall of skills and drill and skill. But I think that it's more beneficial for children of color if you just teach and just naturally see what unfolds. Because this idea of like teaching skills and grammar, that is so very true. You don't learn how to write by just learning the grammatical and this. You learn how to edit as you write. You learn how to make changes as you write. But if you just teach the skill first, then the joy of writing and all those things kind of dissipate, because now you're just so focused on like what I need to fix and what did I do wrong. So I really think that part is very important, because children of color already come to school with a big language deficit. So that part stood out to me a lot, that writing just needs to be in a meaningful context.